This is Your Bird Story, a broadcast of bird stories told by everyday people about their interactions and relationships with wild birds in cities. This season is funded by the Voice for Nature Foundation. I'm your host, Georgia Silvera Seamans. Hi, everyone. I am pleased to welcome Pamela Lowell to the podcast, and I'm going to turn it over to her to introduce herself.
Georgia, thank you so much, first of all, for having me on Your Bird Story. I've been listening to your podcast with all those other guests, and I really like it a lot. And I loved your last guest, Natasha Fontaine. What an interesting story she had. So I got some good ideas from her. So I'm Pamela Lowell. I'm a social worker. I'm an LICSW. I've treated complex emotional trauma for a pretty long time now, I think like 40 years. And I've also been a clinical director, a consultant, a trainer for a minority-owned not-for-profit agency in Providence, Rhode Island. That was probably my favorite job of all time. It is still run by 4 Black women and a very diverse agency. We worked with kids that were unhoused and had significant mental health issues. So I loved that. That's kind of my more recent, more formal kind of job, but now I'm mostly doing private practice. So I've been a birder and a watercolor artist and an author. And that's kind of me. I had a kayak trip in 2022 with my husband and began painting like big, huge watercolors of ospreys and their nests and platforms and donated them to local nature organizations. And that experience culminated in me writing my Summer with Ospreys.
Which is what brings us together.
Yeah.
But before we turn to Ospreys and to the book, what led you to social work?
Oh, that's a great question. In my undergrad, I majored in art and art education. And my very first job was at a residential treatment facility with kids from inner city DC. And I love those kids. They were just wonderful. And there was a social worker who worked there, and she was doing cool things. She was doing therapy, more and more intensive work. And I really wanted to have more intensive experiences with the populations that I would work with. I felt like more helpful in some way, like helping the world more, but also is more interesting to me. Classroom management was not my greatest skill, I have to say. I love teachers. Thank you, teachers, for dealing with our kids, but that was not my thing. That was my journey. Yeah.
Yeah, classroom management is its own thing for sure, separate from actually education.
Yes.
So you have an art background, and so art has been a part of your life. And this kayak trip inspired watercolor paintings. What specifically about the trip made you want to paint the ospreys and their nests?
Well, I've always considered myself a fairly creative person. And during COVID, I did start dabbling a little bit more. I had more time, like we all did. And so I was doing like little portraits of dogs and little portraits of birds, very small, and giving them to people, sending them here. Hope this makes your day a little happier. It was like my little love language to my friends and family. But when I was out on the river, we were lucky enough to live near a very dense osprey population. So we were there in August, and there are over 100 osprey nests on this river. So that means you have the pair, and then you also have their offspring. So sometimes they'll have 2 to 3. So the sky was just filled with ospreys that day. And just, they were fishing and doing all sorts of stuff. And I said, wow, I just had a spark inside me that said, I need to do this. I need to paint them, and I need them to be big because I want to do the platform, I want to do the nest, and I want to do the bird in some way. So to think about filling a whole huge piece of paper before with a little tiny bird or pet was sort of, I don't know, it just didn't seem to match up in a way that this really matched the size of the work, matched the subject matter. And so I started doing that and really loved it. It was a lot of fun. I still do it. That's what inspired me.
What size canvas are we talking about?
Well, it's a full-size watercolor sheet. So it's probably 32 by 26, so 3 feet by 2 feet, something like that. So yeah, they're pretty big. I mean, they're not like wall size, but they're big.
Yeah. Can you describe, I suppose, your studio? Where did you make the paintings? Was there a window? What could you see while painting?
Well, I do my paintings from photographs. I'm not a nature journaler per se, although I do like to sketch and draw nature. I can't really paint from a boat. That's really the best way to observe them. So my studio is our spare guest room. Now that our kids have launched into the world, we have a spare guest room. So it has a bed. Like, what else do you want? Oh, Georgia, it's like a bedroom that I clean up when we have people come stay with us. And it's got, it's got a table and my paints. So that's it. It's not a big fancy studio. I think you'd be interested. I don't know if you're an artist, but a lot of artists have it's just a little, make a corner, make a place to do art, and art will happen for all of us, or whether it's writing or whatever expression that you want to use, dance or singing, make that time and space for it to happen so your brain knows where to show up, and it will.
Yeah, my writing place is behind my bedroom door, folks.
Yep. So you can relate.
So turning to the book, there's so many cool things about the book. And when I go to a bookstore and I open a book, I always read that first paragraph. And if it grabs my attention, then I'm going to purchase the book. And in your first paragraph, it's just filled with the most amazing birds. So bald eagles, heron, kingfisher, egret. Can you set that scene for listeners? And why did you start the book with that scene?
We had moved to this place on a river. We were so lucky. We didn't even want the realtor to know how much we loved it. My husband and I were like jumping up and down in the other room because it was right on a river. So we were downsizing, our kids had launched, and this was like this great place on a river. And I didn't even know at the time all the birds that we would see, the bird life there, being near a body of water, any body of water, pond or whatever, is just incredible for bird life. So there were acres and acres of woodlands across the river from us. So those are the friends or birds that I would see on a daily basis and take photographs of them. That's what I love to do. And I was doing that. That was my respite because I was working in Providence, commuting home from the city. And so that just felt like such an oasis to me. And I was also doing a lot of trauma work. So that was part of an oasis too, to really decompress from some of that stuff. So one morning I did walk out onto, we had a nice deck that you could stand on and have some coffee. And I heard the buzz of chainsaws. I didn't know what they were at first, but then I found out that hundreds of acres were being clear cut across all the woodland across from us and destroyed for a business that was going to auction off cars and car parts. And that summer and that moment really changed a lot inside me because I really realized, first of all, that it wasn't going to be the oasis that it was anymore. But we also tried to do some advocacy to stop it from occurring. And the whole piece of for me, environmental justice, that piece came through. Now, we were fortunate enough, we're privileged enough to be able to move from that place. But so many people are not. They are where industry or pollutants or whatever it is that decides to move into their neighborhood and set up their storefront, they are being exposed to that on a daily basis. And so it really opened that up to me as well, that all those experiences. And I guess I wanted people to understand the importance of that place and the importance of birds to our natural world and how easily it can get destroyed, just wiped out, just like that. And it's hard to have control over.
Yeah, the sort of zoning regulations that allow environmental destruction.
Oh,
Really appalling.
so appalling. And they didn't care. They didn't care that there were bald eagles nesting. They didn't care about how the oil running in from those cars might run into the river and impact the stream and their food source. They really literally did not care.
So, with the imminent destruction of this place that was an oasis for you, a place that was habitat for birds, what came next?
Well, after a lot of discussion, we also recognized, or I recognized, that I didn't have a whole lot of community in that. I had the birds as my community, but you can't really go out, for breakfast with a bird. Well, I guess you could have your cup of coffee on the deck, but they're not really going to talk to you. Well, they're going to talk to you, they're going to sing to you, but they're not going to have a conversation. And as a social worker, recognizing how important community really is, especially on the heels of COVID, when a lot of my community was in my workplace, but I wasn't going to work forever. So those two factors sort of factored into us moving. And, we moved to a place where we had visited a lot, and it was a beautiful community, again, in South Coast, Massachusetts. Although we have cities nearby, New Bedford's like a stone's throw away from our home, and we love going to New Bedford. So Ospreys came into the picture. As I said before, we went out on that estuary and kayaked that day. And I got inspired to start painting. I started giving some of those paintings away to nature organizations to try to help them raise money. The first time I did it, I was like, oh, no one's going to buy my painting. And nobody did bid on my painting for like a week. I'm like, okay, well, there goes my dream of trying to donate my paintings, because nobody really wants them. And then, in an amazing turn of events, on the last night of the art show, where many local artists who were wonderful, had donated paintings, my painting of Ospreys received the highest bid in the show. And I was, again, so excited, mostly because it told me that I actually could pursue this dream. And so I started doing it even more in earnest. And I realized, oh, well, maybe I should, get some more photographs of these ospreys. And I wonder how to do that. And it's all kind of intertwined in my book, how that sort of happened, but a lot of wonderful circumstances happened that led me to be able to volunteer for Massachusetts South Coast Osprey Project and have an even more amazing experience than just taking photographs. It was very transformative for me.
Yeah. Once you decided to write the book, what made you choose the format that you use in the book? So it's journal entries, which it just feels really compelling to me as someone who keeps a diary. This way of kind of moving through time and being able to assign things that are happening in nature to human time. I don't know, there's something that made the experience come even more alive through this formatting of your book, and I would love to know more about that.
Oh, well, thank you. And I'm also very thrilled that you read it, I have to say. I'm secretly like fanning on you right now, like, oh,
Oh,
she read
thank you.
my book. Oh my
I
God.
will admit that I haven't read the book in its entirety, but I recommend this book to folks who are interested in birds and more so the relationships that people have with birds and their habitat.
Well, the journal entry came about. I was sitting down across from an artist who I had met at that very show that I just described. And she was very successful, Sandra Hall. And we were having coffee and she's like, oh, what's happening with your art? And I'm like, oh, I sold that painting, but nothing much else. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know where to go. And then I started describing that I had just started being out on the boat with volunteering. And I was so excited she could hear it in my voice. And she was like, well, Pam, are you going to write a book about that? And I was like, well, I don't know. I haven't written a book in like, I don't know, 15 years. I haven't written anything. It's like a lot of work. Are people even going to want to read a book about ospreys and therapy and art and community? Because those were all the issues that were soaring around. And she said to me, write it down, write everything down that's happening, because this seems like it's really exciting you. And I think that people would want to read it. And so every day that I went out on the boat, and even in between, I started really doing a very intensive journaling at that point, like trying to capture all the conversations, what I saw. Sometimes I'd do it on little scraps of paper in the car on my way home so that I wouldn't forget it. But I think, for me, every week was a 3-hour sort of commitment on the boat. So I'm like trying to recall what happened. So I had to write stuff down. But also, I think what you're saying about how do we match up nature with time? And I wanted readers to have a sense of there's just a very short little window between when ospreys come back, when they hatch their eggs, when the chicks are born, when or hatched, when they start to feed on their own, and our whole translocation process, which we're doing, which we'll get into in a few minutes. And then when they fledge and they have to fly thousands of miles by themselves, they don't fly in flocks, and then stay wherever they're going to stay, wherever they find a place, and then fly back 2 or 3 years later if they're young fledging. So I wanted people to sort of see that connection of how long it takes, but
Mm.
also how much can happen if you're observing and open to observing nature, that there's just your days will be full. Weekend days or after work, whenever you have time, time also pauses and stands still during those moments. So I really wanted to address some things about time and awe and how that played out for me that summer.
Yeah. There's the writing, and you mentioned some of the themes in the book, in addition to the obvious one of ospreys and birds. Can you talk more about those themes of therapy and community and mental health?
Sure. Well, one thing I want to start off with is about mental health and finding purpose and joy in your life. And I try to ask myself, I also ask clients in therapy on a daily basis, and we sort of call it self-care, but we also call it joy, and we also call it, just having something to look forward to. And there's research that backs that up. I didn't want the book to be really research driven. I'd rather show than tell. So even though I'm a therapist, I know all these trauma theories, I know all this stuff. This is not a therapy book per se. It's an experience, though, through the lens of a trauma therapist. So that's a very different lens, I sort of realized, but it's also similar to the lens that scientists use. So we are observers. We're both observers of what's going on in the world around us. We're invested in that world, whether it's the people or the animals or the birds or the vegetation or the habitat, whatever that is. How do we help preserve that? How do we make that better if it's in trouble? So that's a piece of it. Finding community is part of the subtitle of the book. It's a therapist's journey towards hope, community, and healing our planet. The hope piece. So, I'm working with these scientists and naturalists week after week, observing cycles of nature, talking about the health of the salt marshes, our warming climate, also living through that summer, the one that just passed, the hottest summer in recorded human history. So how am I out there week to week without sort of also noticing that and noticing when chicks were distressed, and why are they distressed? Why aren't they around? Is it natural predation, or is it something else going on with our salt marshes or the food supply for the ospreys? The osprey resurgence, and I don't know if you know this, when I talk about ospreys and the resurgence back in the 60s, or they were very endangered, as were all songbirds. You've probably read Carson's book, Silent Spring, and the creation of the EPA helped. But the ospreys were really part of the canary in the coal mine at that time. Now, I just told you about 100 nests on our river alone. There were only a dozen nesting pairs of osprey left in New England in the 60s. Yeah. So that's pretty significant. They really could have been wiped off the face of the earth, or certainly from our area. And they're still struggling in Illinois, which I'll get into in a minute. So scientists and environmentalists somehow came together. The world came together and did a good thing all around the world and said, no more DDT. What else can we do? What else can we clean up? And for me, when looking back, and I've talked with scientists about this, they say, well, that was kind of a single issue. It was difficult, but it wasn't as difficult as some of the issues we're facing now with energy use and climate change. So anyway, so hope is a huge piece of the book. How did I sort of find hope in being among those birds, being among the scientists, and in all the people that I'm meeting in the world that are really out there doing wonderful things in your own neighborhood, that until you start peeling that onion away, you don't even know they're out there. They're like our silent, wonderful, beautiful heroes that are doing way more than I'm doing to help our environment and to help our birding population. So that is hope for me. The community piece is, I really had not, except for work, where I love the folks that I worked with for sure, but I hadn't made any new friends in probably a decade. Like when I sat back and looked at that, that was really kind of shocking to me. So as soon as I moved, and we moved to this area that was more dense, more populated, we're not as rural, even though we have that river there. There are lots of things going on. There are book groups, there are artist groups, there are people who are participating in the environment and policy and food scarcity, all sorts of stuff that you could get involved in and help. And that community was really easy to tap into and access once I started to look around and become involved in it, and friendships form out of that. And the best part is that you don't feel alone anymore. We all know about the culture of loneliness in the US and throughout the world that's been going on pre and post COVID, in my opinion, people that I talk with. But community is part of the cure for that, because it's hard to just make a friend. It's not so hard to show up in a group that's meeting regularly and about a passion that you're interested in, and then just find commonalities that turn into friendship. So I talk a lot with my clients and with folks about, what would you think about that? What do you like to do? Maybe there's a group that does that, and you can feel a part of that, whether that's faith-based or whatever. It's really important to be a part of community.
Can I ask you, Pam, when you realized that you hadn't made new friends in about a decade, you said you were shocked. Why was that shocking? Is it because of your work? Can you say a little bit more about that?
Well, I think there's an age in life itself that when I was busy raising my children, there were a lot of natural connecting points through school, through sports, through whatever. My husband and I moved from that community where we knew people, but we wanted to downsize. We wanted something that we thought more rural. And we thought that was going to be the place where we would land, where there would be more community. And when you're busy working, I think, for me anyway, and raising your family, you don't have a whole lot of time to think about, am I making new friends? Am I not? You're just kind of working, you're doing your deal with your kids, and then you're so exhausted by the weekend. I don't know. And that's not to say I don't have friends. I have lots of old friends that
Mhm.
I've cherished, but they became busy with grandchildren. Sometimes friends move away. Sometimes they were dealing with aging parents. They were at different phases with launching kids. So I had that desire to be more social outside of work, but I couldn't find where that need would be filled. And
Mhm.
I thought it would be filled in this rural community. And I think communities are different. People were kind of content. Maybe there were people there that I just couldn't find for some reason because there weren't organized groups. So it's tricky. And it was upsetting to me because I like meeting people and making friends. It's fun. It's really
Yeah.
fun. Yeah. And I missed my friends at work because during COVID, now it was just on Zoom that I would see them, and that wasn't enough. It just didn't fill it.
Yeah. I mean, just even in your response to my question, folks can't see, but I'm nodding my head because these are sentiments that I've heard, experienced, read about, and it's really nice to be able to talk about them because real people are experiencing disconnections and loss. And it's really wonderful to be able to spend time with people who share a passion. And it's so clear that you've found that in your new estuary place.
Well, that's the wonderful thing I think about birding too, is that it can be solitary. You can sit in a park or you can go do a nature walk somewhere by yourself if you need that time to refuel. But it also can be a really nice way to meet folks who share your passion. So birding can give you connections when you need it and respite when you really need it, when you want it. So I do love that about birding and about this experience too. So yeah, and about COVID too, I've done for our agency, we also have a daycare that one of the women sisters who I'd mentioned before runs, and it's a great award-winning daycare. But she said, Pam, people are really still hurting about COVID. There was a lot of loss that a lot of people still aren't talking. There's not that space to talk about it at work. And then they're so busy and they're doing, could you do some workshops for us? So those have been very valuable for folks. I think we still aren't honoring all the loss that occurred, not just losing people, which a lot of folks did, but losing a lot of other things too. It was good in that the only good thing to come out of it was we were all sort of sharing that same experience as humans. But there was so much loss and disconnection that occurred. And for young moms and for kids, for teachers, for nurses, I saw a lot of those folks in therapy who are really struggling with those losses. So thank you for bringing that up and sort of underlining that for us.
Yeah. So the third part of the subtitle of your book is Healing Our Planet. And, the subtitle is hopeful, right? The first word in it, the hope, toward hope, community, and healing our planet. It sounds like you found inspiration in that work. And what, from your experience as a volunteer, made you see planetary healing happening or the possibility of planetary healing?
It's funny to me. I was talking with one of my friends who's a children's book author, Zoe Ali, about the title and about the book and how do I go about, getting this into shape. And I was telling her the title of it, and she was like, "Well, Pam, you kind of had me at a therapist journey, like you really have to add all that other stuff." I was like, "Yeah, I did. I think it's too late. It's too late to change it. I'm going to keep it." But the Healing Our Planet came because I'm a healer. I mean, I've worked in trauma with people with anxiety and depression, with kids and families for my whole life, a therapist first. And so I started to think about, what, as I'm out on the boat and boating with friends, and I'm asking and talking about this more intentionally, what could my field of social work have to even offer to help the environment? Because I am not a scientist. And so I started to imagine a therapy session with planet Earth, that Mother Earth shows up to my door and walks in and says she needs some help. And what would that look like? Because she is the most traumatized of all. We have really traumatized her. What are her interactions with us because of that? She's showing us so much dysregulation now. She's showing us, I'm a mess. I'm not okay, guys. I need help. It's a humorous / fantasy therapy session, an interview, an intake session, if you will, like the first time, that is in my book, but it's also one that I role play when I'm doing my talks around, around the East Coast and some other places. And I have an audience participant play Mother Earth. I have a beach ball of the earth that I drew a little Mother Earth face, which is part of the illustration. And we do that role play in front of the audience to really try to have them look at our planet and our relationship with our Earth in a different way. That's really, to be honest, what's driving me more to do these talks. I love sharing my love of ospreys and birding, and the birders are natural environmentalists anyway. It seems like that's what's kind of coming up a lot. But that's when I started thinking about the healing piece. So that kind of sharing that, but also like, I didn't want to, and I intentionally didn't want to give a laundry list in the book, like, oh, you can recycle more, or, oh, you could use these laundry pods, or, oh, you can grow vegetables. Like, people know how to access that. And it's going to be very, very different depending on what community, where they are in life, what their resources are, how much time they have. I just couldn't possibly do it all. But what I did do was think about, as a social worker and a therapist, can I spark a different kind of conversation that would encourage hope, community, and healing our planet? And so I thought of 3 questions that I thought this might help. So the first one is to ask your friend or colleague or neighbor or family member, what do you think is happening to the environment where you live? What do you think's happening? What do you notice happening? What's going on? What do you see? So just kind of opening it up that way. And then the second question is, well, what are you doing to help? And when I ask people that, when I have that conversation, there's like an abundance of ideas, and everybody is really doing something. Very few people don't care and aren't doing anything at all. So that helps us feel less alone. That helps us feel connected. It helps us role model for each other, because role modeling is a really big piece of environmental change. When people feel they have both agency, which means what they do matters, will make a difference. People many times think, oh, yeah, I'm doing this, but it really doesn't matter. Well, wait, it does matter. And I'm doing this too. And this is this new thing. And then the third question, which I think is the most important, is there something more we can do together? And so that to me feels like addressing loneliness And that feeling, like some people are really like, ooh, I can't show up a meeting by myself, or I don't have time. How do we hold each other accountable? So it's like really trying to boil it down to like the simplest possible thing that I could think of. But it's not really that simple. It's pretty profound if you can have those conversations and then have them over and over and over again. And so that's where the healing the planet piece comes from, because I think we can do this. We've done it once or more than once with Osprey. We did save them from the brink of extinction. And doing just, I think the Earth, like a therapy session, if you were going to therapy or if you've ever been, I have 3 times. So I can say I'm not calling anybody out here. I've been 3 times proudly, loved it every time, love my therapists. They're awesome. Hello, if you're listening. But you go every week or you go every other week for like an hour, 45 minutes, and then you heal. It takes a time commitment and it takes just a little bit more. And if everyone did just a little bit more, whether that's advocacy, cleaning up a part, and millions of things, there are millions of people that are working on this already. You don't have to invent it or figure it out. That I think, I think we could make some really wonderful changes, and we already are.
Oh my gosh, I want to do these 3 questions with a group. I feel like you could travel virtually or in person around the country and have these workshops in communities, because the questions, as you say, are profound, but they're also accessible. Like that first one, meeting people where they are, you're not accusing them, it's an open question, like, and the belief in people that they are doing something. I think often there's this kind of naysay, scarcity way that we think about how people interact with an environment, like having a buddy, the role modeling. There's, yes, as you say, a lot of research, even with front yards, if there's a tipping point where if people start doing different things with their front yards, then you can change a whole block. And kind of a lot of things are better done with a friend. So, yeah, I think those 3 things are so lovely and frankly applicable to things outside of the environment. And it makes sense as a social worker and therapist that you would have this framework for folks to use. So that's really wonderful. I want to close by talking more about the natural history of the osprey, which you have mentioned a few times, including translocation and Illinois. But let's start out. What do you love about osprey? What did you learn? Like, what are their quirks? Please share with us.
Well, I learned so much about ospreys. I started out just thinking they were just really cool birds to paint, and I knew that they lived on fish, and I thought that was interesting because most people on the East Coast anyway have seen an osprey carrying a fish around if you visit our shorelines. But I learned lots of things, like they have closable nostrils. So when they dive down into the water, their nostrils actually close to prevent, I guess, water, like nose plugs. I thought that was kind of cool. And they raise their young in a family when they're kids. I'll say kids with a quote around it, or adolescents. They like to live in community. So there's another community intersection. And when their offspring are starting to learn how to fly, they visit other folks' nests in the estuary, just like teenagers going to their friend's house. I thought that was so cool and so cute. And I got to be on the boat one day with one of the leading researchers of ospreys in the country, Dr. Alan Poole. So just being out on the boat with an expert, I just soaked up everything that he was telling me and wrote everything down and did research around the young travel thousands of miles, but like all the way down to South America from here. I don't know if it's boring. I could go on and on for like hours about my love of ospreys. They're like us, they have a family. Their nests are amazing. Every nest is different. Some are like flat because it's just been started. Others, they take stuff and decorate their nests. Unfortunately, sometimes it's with plastic bags, but you might find a corn cob, you might find feathers, you might find a little figurine, shells. Like, it's pretty cool. Like, they're like interior decorators with their own nests. So I love painting those nests because they're all different and they're all unique. And that ability to observe them in their differences in such a dense area was really fascinating. And, they'll look at you, they'll kind of give you the eye if you're coming back, holding them in my hands. I got a chance to hold them because, so just quickly, our translocation is in Illinois. They have an endangered osprey population. They have not rebounded as we have. And so 5 years ago, Westport, Mass, where this project's located, connected with them, and we supply about a dozen chicks per year to Illinois. And it's an amazing process of how we do that. We band them, and then when they're 5 to 6 weeks old, before they've started to fledge or fly, right when they start to feed by themselves. So before they feed by themselves, the mom or the female tears off a piece of fish and puts it in their mouth. That's what they do. They don't regurgitate.
Okay.
So they tear off a piece, feed their chicks, and they have these huge talons and they're tiny little chicks, and their mothers are like so carefully walking around them so they're safe. So before they fledge, once they start eating on their own, we take them one day. We have a day where we retrieve them from the nest, and there's a whole big process that we go through that's like down to the minute plan, like a military op sort of secret service kidnapping
I'm sure the
like,
parents are very agitated.
Oh yeah, they don't like it. We don't take more. We don't ever take the last chick from the nest. We always leave one, or at least we try to. So we're taking them, we're putting them in little boxes that look like Chinese food boxes, containers, or like a kitten box, put them on the boat. Then we bring them to the airport where Dr. Tifei Ting from the University of Illinois, she's out there with us too, sits in the plane with 12 chicks and brings them to Illinois. I know. And osprey poop is the most disgusting poop that you could ever smell in your life. I'm just going to say it. There, I said it. Haters hate me if you want. But for anybody in your audience who's listening who's smelled it, they will be shaking their head. So anyway, she's in this plane cooped up for all these hours. They bring them to a field called a hacking box. And the hacking box, it's enclosed, and they're in there for several weeks being fed live fish by field technicians. And at the same time, the field techs are also counting wing flaps. So why are they counting wing flaps? Because once ospreys are flapping their wings about 200 to 300 times a day, you know that they're almost ready to fledge. We can't let them out of those hack boxes into the environment before they're ready to protect themselves. So we really have to be very careful about the timing. And then they are fledging, they're hunting, they're learning how to hunt in Illinois. Well, why would they go back to Illinois when they were hatched in Westport? Because in Westport, all they saw was the inside of a nest. In Illinois, they're seeing the geography. They're learning how to fish. And so in the fall, as ospreys always depart in the fall, they migrate thousands of miles away. Who knows where they go unless they're banded, and we're lucky enough to see them. Florida, South America, Central America, those warmer climates. And then they stay there for 2 to 3 years until sexual maturity hits. And then miraculously, 2 of our ospreys from Westport have returned to Illinois this very year.
That's wonderful.
This past summer, and started their own osprey families. And we're paying it forward. Those are similar things that were done in Westport. So the restoration of a population, I think, has a lot of implications for our environment as well. Like, how much do we really want to do this? But maybe it is necessary, that we might find it necessary sometime to do it with different other species. And isn't it interesting that we've sort of learned a lot about what that might look like if we need to do that someday? So that's that story.
Wow, I had never thought about osprey poop before. This is definitely a story I will share with some of the younger people in my life who will be very fascinated by that fact. You sound like you have absorbed so much knowledge firsthand and from the folks that you do this work with. You sound like a scientist, Pam. So
I'm a citizen scientist now,
yeah,
Georgia. That's what my
yeah,
friend Karen Kaiser calls me. She's like, you can introduce yourself that way. Citizen
definitely.
scientist, Pam.
Pam, I really want to thank you for spending this time with me talking about the book and all of the experiences that informed it. I know there's a lot more that probably didn't make it into the book, and so hopefully people can catch you on a book tour and ask more questions.
They can always contact me at my website, Pamela Lowell, www.pamelalowell.com, if they want to contact me for more information about the book or speaking. There's a contact form there. And I try not to say no, although this summer I have to admit I'm like super duper busy with a lot of different talks, but it's really enjoyable and fun. And thank you for letting me talk about it and spread the word. It's really joyful for me. And I hope your listeners got something out of our conversation as well.
I know I definitely did, and I think they will too. Thanks so much again, Pam.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Your Bird Story. Like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you back here next month.